"I can't have children," the Apache woman whispered. "Then you'll raise mine," said the rancher. The sun hung low over the Arizona horizon, casting long golden shadows across the dusty plains. The rancher stood at the edge of his land, squinting at the dry grass that swayed in the hot wind. Life on the ranch had always been hard, but since the passing of his wife it had become almost unbearable. The fields were unruly, the cattle thin, and loneliness had settled into his bones like an unwelcome guest he could not chase away. He missed her laughter, the way she would hum softly while feeding the animals, and even her small frustrations when things went wrong. Now, all that remained were memories, and the weight of keeping the ranch alive alone. He sighed and walked toward the barn, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The air smelled of hay and dry earth. As he moved among the stalls, checking the animals for signs of sickness or injury, he couldn't help but feel the emptiness of the silence around him. The ranch had once been full of life, not just from the cattle and horses, but from the warmth of family, the small joys of companionship. Now, every creak of the barn door, every whisper of wind, seemed to remind him of what he had lost. That afternoon, as he repaired a fence along the far edge of his property, he noticed movement in the distance. At first he thought it was a deer, but as he squinted against the sun, he saw the figure of a woman moving carefully through the tall grass. She was carrying a small basket and bending occasionally to gather herbs or plants. There was something different about her. Her movements were quiet, almost invisible, as if she were a part of the land itself. Her long, dark hair glinted in the sunlight, and her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon with a careful attention that reminded him of someone who had learned to survive in the wild. Curiosity drew him closer, though he tried not to make himself too noticeable. He wanted to see who she was, why she was on his land, and whether she posed any danger. As he approached, he could see more clearly that she was an Apache woman, her clothes simple but neat, the kind of garments made for practicality and movement rather than decoration. She paused, sensing perhaps that she was being watched, and turned her gaze toward him. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, a quiet awareness of each other's presence. The rancher cleared his throat, unsure what to say. "Hello there," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. The woman nodded slightly, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. She didn't speak at first, just tilted her head and continued gathering plants, her fingers deftly plucking leaves and roots with practiced ease. The rancher watched her, fascinated by her skill and the way she moved through the land with such quiet confidence. He realized that she knew the terrain better than he did, moving with a grace that only comes from a life spent close to the earth. After a few moments she finally spoke, her voice soft and steady. "These are for medicine," she said, holding up the small plants in her hands. Her English was clear but accented, each word chosen carefully, as if she had learned to speak it out of necessity rather than habit. The rancher nodded, understanding her intention, and asked, "Are you far from your home? You shouldn't be wandering too far alone." She smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips that hinted at both amusement and sorrow.
"I have no home," she said simply.
The words hung in the air, heavier than the heat of the afternoon. The rancher's heart ached at her honesty. He had faced loneliness before, but there was something different about this woman, a depth of isolation that mirrored his own, though he would never have admitted it to anyone. Over the next few days, their encounters became more frequent. She appeared on the outskirts of his property, sometimes with baskets of herbs, sometimes just walking silently observing the land. The rancher began to leave small gifts for her, a loaf of bread, some cured meat, or a jar of milk. At first she accepted them reluctantly, always with a quiet nod, never with words of thanks. But over time she began to talk more, sharing small stories about the land, the plants, and the animals she had tended to throughout her life. She spoke of the mountains to the north, of streams that no longer ran, and of the wildlife that had disappeared as settlers expanded across the land. The rancher listened intently, fascinated by her knowledge. He had lived on the land all his life, yet she seemed to understand it in a way he never could. She knew how to find water hidden beneath the earth, how to treat a sick horse with nothing more than herbs, and how to track animals by the smallest of signs. Her presence began to feel like a reminder that the land still had its own secrets, that survival required more than brute strength. It required patience, observation, and respect. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, he found her sitting on a rock near the edge of his property, staring at the horizon. The wind tousled her hair, and her expression was thoughtful, almost melancholic. He approached slowly, unsure if he should interrupt her solitude. She didn't move as he sat down a few feet away, and for a long moment, they simply watched the sun dip below the mountains together. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I have been alone for so long,"
She said.
"I have learned to survive, but I have no one to share it with."
The rancher felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to tell her that he understood, that he too had been alone for years. But the words felt inadequate, too small to bridge the gap between their experiences. Instead, he nodded, letting the silence between them carry the weight of understanding. Days turned into weeks, and their bond slowly deepened. The rancher found himself looking forward to her visits, to the quiet conversations and the shared moments of watching the land together. He began to teach her some of his own skills, showing her how to mend fences, care for the cattle, and maintain the ranch. In return, she taught him how to identify edible plants, how to treat minor injuries, and how to listen to the land itself. They worked together in a rhythm that felt natural, as if their lives were slowly intertwining like the roots of the plants she collected. Through their shared labor and quiet companionship, the rancher began to feel something he had not felt in years, a sense of hope. It was not a loud or dramatic hope, but a steady, gentle feeling that perhaps life could still hold connection, understanding, and even love. He did not know where this relationship would lead, or whether it could ever grow beyond friendship and mutual respect. But for the first time in a long while, he felt that the emptiness that had haunted him might begin to fade. And for the Apache woman, the ranch offered something she had not known she needed: a place to belong, even temporarily, and someone who treated her with respect and patience. She had grown used to being wary, to hiding her true self from the world, but here she could let down her guard, if only a little. She could share her knowledge, her skills, and her quiet thoughts without fear of judgment. And in the rancher she saw not just a man who could offer help, but someone who recognized her strength, resilience, and worth. As the weeks passed, the rancher and the Apache woman continued to build a fragile but meaningful connection. They shared the work of the land, the trials of the seasons, and the quiet moments of reflection that came with solitude in such a harsh, beautiful place. Neither spoke of the future, and yet both felt the stirrings of something deeper, a bond that went beyond mere companionship. In the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona plains, two lonely souls had found each other, slowly discovering that even in the harshest conditions, connection and understanding could take root and grow. By the end of that first season, the rancher could no longer imagine facing the challenges of the land alone, and the Apache woman, for the first time in years, felt the faint stirrings of belonging, of trust, and perhaps, just perhaps, hope. But their story had only just begun. But already it promised that life, even when it seemed desolate, could bring unexpected gifts in the form of people who saw and understood each other. The days grew shorter as the seasons changed, and the rancher and the Apache woman spent more time together on the land. The air carried a crispness that hinted at winter's approach, and the light of the sun softened to a warm golden hue that made the plains glow. Their routine had become familiar, tending to the animals, repairing fences, gathering firewood, and sharing quiet moments of conversation. Yet beneath this growing friendship, a quiet tension began to emerge, one rooted in unspoken truths. One evening, as they sat near the edge of the ranch watching the sun sink behind the distant hills, the Apache woman finally broke the silence. She had been quiet for much of the day, her mind occupied with thoughts she had long avoided. "There is something I must tell you," she said, her voice soft, almost trembling. The rancher looked at her with concern, sensing the seriousness in her tone. She took a deep breath, the warm wind lifting strands of her dark hair around her face, and whispered, I cannot have children." The rancher was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. He had expected many things from life: loss, hardship, loneliness, But this confession carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. Her eyes were downcast, filled with a quiet sorrow that spoke of years of pain and solitude. I have known this for some time, she continued. I always feared it, but I never spoke of it. People would look at me and expect, and I could never give them what they wanted. I have carried this shame for many years. The rancher's heart ached as he listened. He had known loss himself, had known the longing for family, the desire to nurture and raise children. And yet, hearing her words, he felt not pity, but a deep, tender respect for her honesty and courage. You've carried that alone for so long, he said quietly. You've endured more than most people could imagine. She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his, searching for judgment but finding none.
I have lived in the shadow of what I cannot do, she said.
And now I fear I have no one to share my life with, no family, no children, nothing to leave behind. I have only my work, my survival, but it is not enough. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of her sadness. The rancher felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to say something that could ease her pain, something that could bridge the loneliness that had defined her life for so long, but words felt too small. Instead, he simply nodded and reached out, placing a steady hand on hers. You are not alone, he said gently. You have skills, knowledge, and strength that are rare. You are valuable not for what you can give in children, but for who you are. I see you. I respect you. And if you will let me, I want to be here with you. You don't have to face this alone anymore. For the first time in years, a small smile flickered across her face. It was fragile, like sunlight breaking through clouds, but it held a promise. She had been so accustomed to hiding her pain, to protecting herself from judgment and disappointment, that the simple act of being acknowledged, of being understood, felt revolutionary.
Thank you, she whispered.
No one has ever said that to me before. As the days passed, their bond deepened. They shared more than chores and routines. They shared stories of their past, of the lives they had lived before they met. The rancher spoke of his wife, of the laughter and love they had shared, and of the emptiness that followed her passing. The Apache woman spoke of her childhood, the harsh lessons of survival, and the moments of joy she had found in simple things like the songs of birds or the sight of a deer grazing quietly in the distance. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, the rancher noticed how skillfully she handled the work. Her hands moved with confidence and precision, a combination of learned skill and natural talent. You have a way with your hands, he said, admiration in his voice. She shrugged lightly, a modest gesture. I learned to survive, she said simply. Everything I do to stay alive and help others.
The rancher watched her, thinking of the years she had spent carrying her sorrow alone.
He realized that her strength was not just in her skills or her knowledge, but in her resilience, her ability to endure hardships without losing her spirit. And yet he could see the quiet longing behind her eyes, the wish for connection, for family, for a life that went beyond mere survival. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the Apache woman spoke again, her voice hesitant. Do you ever think about having a family? She asked. The rancher looked into the flames, thinking of the children he had never had, the family that had slipped through his fingers like sand. I do, he admitted. I think about it every day. I wanted a family so badly, and then life changed, and I was left with a ranch and memories. Then perhaps, she said after a moment, family is not always what we expect. It can take different forms. Perhaps it is not just those we give birth to, but those we care for, those we nurture, those who depend on us, and whom we protect. Her words were simple, but they carried a profound truth that resonated deeply with him. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a distant coyote, its cry echoing across the plains. The moment reminded them both of the harshness of the land and the constant struggle for survival. Yet it also reminded them of the beauty that existed in life, the quiet moments of connection, and the importance of finding companionship amidst adversity. As the weeks continued, The rancher found himself thinking more and more about the possibility of creating a life together, in whatever form it might take. He saw how the Apache woman cared for the animals, how she tended the land with skill and respect, and how she approached every challenge with patience and courage. He realized that a family could be built not just on biology, but on shared love, trust, and commitment. One day, as they worked together to repair a water trough, the rancher asked a question that had been on his mind for some time. Would you consider staying here? Not just visiting, but living on the ranch with me? He watched her carefully, unsure how she would respond. Her eyes softened, and for a long moment she did not answer. Then she spoke, her voice steady but filled with thoughtfulness. "I will stay," she said. "Not because I must, but because I want to. This land and this life has a place for me, and perhaps I can have a place for others as well." Her words filled him with a sense of relief and hope he had not felt in years. He realized that this was the beginning of something meaningful, a chance to create a bond that went beyond friendship and mutual respect. It was a step toward building a life that could offer them both companionship, purpose, and perhaps, in time, a sense of family. That evening they sat together outside the small cabin the rancher had built, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. The world seemed vast and unforgiving, but in that moment it felt smaller, more intimate. They had found each other in a place where solitude had been the only constant, and that connection was a gift neither had expected. The Apache woman rested her head on her hands, looking thoughtful. "I have always been alone," she said quietly. "I thought it was the way life must be. But now, I see that perhaps there is more. Perhaps we can create something together, even if it is not what we once imagined." The rancher reached out, placing his hand over hers. "We will create it together," he said. "Step by step, day by day, we will find our way." In the weeks that followed, their bond continued to grow. They shared meals, repaired fences, and cared for the animals together. The rancher taught her how to handle cattle and horses, while she taught him about the land, the plants, and the quiet lessons of survival. They laughed together, worked together, and slowly, the silence that had once defined their days began to fill with conversation, companionship, and trust. Through their shared experiences, they began to understand that family was not just about children or bloodlines. It was about care, support, and the willingness to be there for each other through hardships and joys alike. And in this understanding, a new chapter of life began to take shape, one that promised hope, connection, and the possibility of creating a family in ways they had never imagined. The Apache woman had shared her secret, her sorrow, and her fear, and in doing so, had opened the door to a future she had long thought impossible. The rancher, in turn, had offered patience, understanding, and a chance to belong. Together, they began to build something fragile but strong, rooted in respect, love, and the shared determination to face life's challenges side by side. The winter had passed and spring had begun to breathe life back into the Arizona plains. The grass turned green again. Wildflowers appeared along the edges of the ranch, and the sound of running water returned to the small creek that cut through the property. The rancher and the Apache woman had grown closer over the months, their bond strengthened by shared work, mutual respect, and quiet understanding. Yet life had more surprises in store for them, and one such surprise arrived one morning in the form of a small, frightened child. It had been a clear morning when the rancher noticed a figure stumbling along the path near the edge of the property. At first he thought it was an animal, perhaps a lost calf or young deer, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old. The boy was dirty, his clothes torn and patched, his face streaked with tears and dust. He clutched a small bundle of belongings in a ragged sack, looking around desperately as though searching for someone who would never return. The rancher knelt beside him gently, careful not to scare the child further.
"Hey there," he said softly.
He often took up no one with his. I have nowhere to go," he whispered, his voice trembling. The rancher's heart tightened. He had seen loss and hardship in many forms, but the sight of a child alone and afraid struck a chord deep within him. The Apache woman arrived shortly after, carrying a basket of herbs she had gathered from the nearby hills. She froze for a moment when she saw the child, instinctively scanning him for signs of injury or sickness. Then she stepped closer, her movements careful and gentle. "He needs help," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice carried authority and compassion, and the rancher nodded in agreement. They brought the boy into the small cabin near the center of the ranch. The rancher made a warm fire, and the Apache woman prepared a simple meal of bread and stew, which the boy devoured hungrily. He had not eaten properly in days, it seemed, and as he ate, his body relaxed ever so slightly. The rancher and the woman watched him carefully, giving him space but remaining close enough to offer comfort and safety. After the meal, the boy spoke hesitantly, telling fragments of his story. His parents had died in a tragic accident at a nearby homestead, leaving him alone in the world. He had wandered for days, surviving on scraps and whatever he could find in the wild, until he stumbled upon the ranch. His words were cautious, his eyes constantly darting around as if expecting danger at any moment. The Apache woman listened carefully, nodding in understanding. She knew the pain of loss, the weight of isolation, and the fear that could linger long after tragedy had struck. Over the next few days, the rancher and the Apache woman worked together to care for the boy. The rancher showed him how to tend the animals, how to collect eggs from the hens, and how to help with chores around the ranch. The Apache woman taught him about the plants and herbs that grew wild on the land, how to find food in nature, and how to respect the world around him. The boy, who had once been fearful and withdrawn, began to open up under their care. One afternoon, while walking along the creek to check on the water level, the boy hesitated before stepping into the shallow water. The Apache woman knelt beside him and took his hand. "It's safe," she said gently. "Sometimes we must trust the world to care for us, just as it cares for the land and the animals." He looked at her, doubt still in his eyes, but he stepped forward, letting her guide him. Slowly, he began to laugh, a sound that had been absent for far too long. The rancher smiled from behind them, feeling a warmth in his heart he hadn't known in years. As weeks turned into months, the bond between the three of them grew stronger. The boy became part of their daily routine, rising early to help with chores, learning the ways of the land, and listening intently to the stories the Apache woman told him of her culture and heritage. She taught him about the stars, the changing seasons, and the importance of respect for nature. The rancher, in turn, shared stories of his past, of his wife and their dreams, and of the land that had been his life for so long. The boy soaked it all in, learning not just survival skills, but lessons about courage, resilience, and love. It was not always easy. The boy had moments of fear and anger, sometimes lashing out when memories of his parents overwhelmed him. On one particularly difficult day, he ran out into the fields, screaming and crying, desperate for someone who could no longer return. The rancher and the Apache woman pursued him, calling his name softly. When they finally caught up, the woman knelt beside him, holding his face gently in her hands. "It is okay to feel pain," she said quietly.
It is okay to miss them, but you are safe now.
"You have us and we will not leave you." The rancher arrived at her side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "We are your family now," he said firmly. "Not because we were meant to be, but because we choose to be. You belong here." The boy looked up at them, tears streaking his face, and for the first time he allowed himself to believe it. That night he slept peacefully by the fire, a small smile on his face, surrounded by people who cared for him. The Apache woman found herself changed by the boy's presence. She had spent years accepting the reality that she could not have children, that her life would be lived without the experience of nurturing a child of her own. Yet now, as she watched the boy sleep, she realized that love and care could take many forms. She could give guidance, protection, and wisdom. She could teach, comfort, and nurture. In raising him, she found a purpose that filled the void she had long carried in her heart. The rancher noticed the change in her as well. He saw the softness in her eyes when she spoke to the boy, the patience in her hands as she guided him, and the quiet joy that seemed to return to her face. He realized that family was not defined solely by blood or biology, but by the bonds of love, trust, and shared responsibility. The boy had brought something precious into their lives, a chance to build a family from what life had given them, rather than what it had taken away. As spring fully bloomed, the ranch thrived once more. The cattle grew strong, the fields were productive, and the land seemed to respond to the care and attention of the three who lived upon it. The boy became an integral part of the ranch, learning skills that would serve him for life and forming bonds that would shape his future. He laughed more often, ran freely through the fields, and spoke openly with both the rancher and the Apache woman. He began to call her mother and the rancher father, not out of obligation, but out of love and recognition of the family they had formed together. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of a large oak tree, the boy asked the Apache woman a question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Mother," he said, "why did you stay here with us? You could have gone anywhere." She looked at him thoughtfully, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Because I wanted to," she said simply. "Because I saw that we could be a family, and I wanted to share my life with you and your father." Families are not only made of those we are born to, but also of those we choose to love and care for. The boy smiled, understanding in a way only a child can. The rancher watched the scene quietly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had lost much in his life, but in that moment he realized he had gained something far more precious. A family built not on circumstance, but on choice, care, and love. The land that had once seemed lonely and harsh now felt full of life, laughter, and hope. Days turned into months, and seasons continued their cycle. The rancher, the Apache woman, and the boy faced challenges together: storms that threatened the crops, illness among the livestock, and occasional dangers from the wild. But they faced them as a family, united and strong. Each difficulty strengthened their bond, teaching them the value of patience, resilience, and trust. Through it all, the Apache woman discovered a new strength within herself. She realized that while she could not bear children of her own, she could nurture and guide the boy with a love that was just as deep, just as enduring. She found joy in his laughter, pride in his accomplishments, and comfort in the warmth of their shared home. She had discovered that family was not limited to biology, and that love could create connections that were as real and meaningful as any she had once imagined. And so, life on the ranch continued, full of work, learning, and the simple pleasures of companionship. The boy thrived, the Apache woman flourished in her role as his caretaker, and the rancher found a sense of fulfillment he had not thought possible after so many years of loneliness. Together, they created a life that honored the past, embraced the present, and held hope for the future. A family forged not by blood, but by love, choice, and shared devotion. The summer sun rose high over the ranch, casting bright light across the fields and warming the earth beneath their feet. Life had settled into a rhythm for the rancher, the Apache woman, and the boy. But as always, the land had its own challenges, and no family was ever truly free from them. The harshness of the desert and the unpredictability of nature tested even the strongest bonds, and this summer would prove no different. It began with the cattle. A few of the younger calves fell ill unexpectedly, their bodies weakened by a sudden outbreak. The rancher noticed it early, checking the animals every morning as he had done for years. But despite his experience, the sickness spread faster than he anticipated. He worked tirelessly to care for the calves, feeding them, keeping them warm, and isolating those that were sick. The Apache woman joined him, her knowledge of herbs and natural remedies proving invaluable. She mixed poultices and tonics, applying them carefully to the calves, while also instructing the boy in how to help without harming the animals. "I don't know if this'll work," the boy said one morning, worried. He held a small wooden spoon, measuring the bitter herbal mixture as she instructed. "You can't know for sure," she replied gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But doing nothing will not help anyone. We must try, and we must care. That is what makes a difference." Together they worked long hours, never leaving the sick calves alone, taking turns to rest and eat. Slowly the animals began to improve, their strength returning under their careful watch. The rancher watched the woman and the boy with admiration, realizing once again that family was not just about love and words, but action and sacrifice. He felt proud of them both and grateful for the support they gave each other. Even as they worked to heal the cattle, other challenges arose. A sudden drought threatened the crops, the small garden that provided vegetables and herbs for their meals. The soil cracked under the hot sun, and the young plants began to wither. The Apache woman examined the earth carefully, running her fingers through the dry soil, noting where water might still be found. "We can save some," she said with determination. "We must use what water we have wisely and carefully, and the plants we save will give us the strength to continue." The rancher and the boy followed her instructions, watering only what was essential, carefully shielding plants from the harsh sun, and using old techniques passed down by generations. They worked as a team, their efforts precise and coordinated, and slowly, the garden began to survive. It was a small victory, but in a harsh land, small victories were worth celebrating. Life was not only challenged by nature. One afternoon, a group of travelers passed near the ranch, their intentions unclear. They spoke loudly, laughing in a way that seemed careless, almost threatening to the quiet balance the ranch had established. The rancher met them calmly, greeting them with a steady voice and offering water for their horses. The Apache woman watched closely, noting their behavior and ready to act if necessary. The boy stayed behind, hidden for safety, learning the importance of caution and observation. "Not all people are kind," the woman whispered to the rancher after they had seen the travelers off. "But those who are kind must act carefully, or the unkind may take advantage." The rancher nodded, understanding that life on the frontier was not only about caring for the land and animals, but also about navigating the challenges of human nature. The woman's wisdom, gained through experience and survival, was invaluable. Through these trials, the family grew closer. They celebrated each small success together: the recovery of a calf, a meal harvested from the garden, the quiet evenings when the fire burned low, and the stars shone bright above. The boy flourished under the combined care of the rancher and the Apache woman, learning not only practical skills but also lessons about courage, resilience, and love. He discovered the value of patience and perseverance, watching the adults handle challenges with strength and wisdom. One particularly harsh day tested them like never before. A sudden storm swept across the plains, winds howling, rain pouring, and lightning striking dangerously close to the cabin. The animals panicked, and the family had to act quickly to secure the cattle and protect the boy from harm. The rancher directed the efforts, moving between the fields and the barn, while the Apache woman stayed close to the boy, holding him steady and keeping him calm. The storm raged for hours, testing their endurance and courage, but together they managed to weather it. By nightfall, they were exhausted, wet, and muddy, yet alive and safe. Sitting by the fire afterward, the boy rested his head against the Apache woman's shoulder. "We did it," he whispered, awe in his voice. She smiled gently. "Yes, we did. Together we are stronger than any storm. Together we survive," the rancher added quietly. "And together we will keep this land, our home, and our family safe, no matter what challenges come." It was in these moments that the depth of their bond became clear. The Apache woman, once alone and sorrowful, had found a family that depended on her wisdom, courage, and love. The rancher, once lonely and burdened by loss, had discovered joy, hope, and a sense of purpose in guiding and supporting them both. The boy, once scared and uncertain, had grown into a confident, capable child, secure in the love and protection of those around him. Even as they faced challenges, there was time for laughter and joy. The boy learned to ride one of the older horses under the rancher's watchful eye, falling off several times but always getting back up. The Apache woman taught him how to fish in a creek, and together they laughed at the small mishaps that inevitably occurred. They celebrated the first harvest from the garden, cooking a simple meal together and sharing stories around the fire. Each moment of happiness reminded them that life, even in hardship, held beauty and reward. Through these experiences, the rancher realized something profound. Family was not built only in perfect times, but in the way people faced difficulties together. It was in the quiet moments of support, the acts of protection, and the shared victories over challenges both small and large. He understood that love was demonstrated not only in words but in actions, in showing up, and in standing together when the world felt harsh and unforgiving. The Apache woman reflected on the changes within herself as well. She had learned to trust, to rely on others, and to accept love and care in return. She had nurtured a child who was not hers by birth, but had become hers in every meaningful way. She had grown close to the rancher, recognizing in him a partner, a friend, and a fellow survivor who valued her for who she was. The hardships they faced together strengthened their connection, deepening respect, trust, and quiet love. As the summer drew to a close, the ranch stood resilient, a testament to their perseverance. The animals were healthy. The garden had survived the drought, and the boy had grown stronger, more confident, and happier. The family had endured trials that might have broken lesser bonds, and in doing so had found a sense of unity and strength that would carry them through the years. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun set behind the distant mountains, the Apache woman spoke softly. "We have faced much," she said. "Storms, illness, fear, and yet here we are, together. Safe, strong." The rancher nodded, his eyes reflecting the glow of the sunset. "Yes," he said. "Together, that is what makes us a family. Not what we have lost, but what we have found in each other." The boy, leaning against the rancher's side, smiled up at them both. "I like our family," he said simply. "We take care of each other." His words, innocent but true, filled the Apache woman's heart with warmth. She realized that despite the pain and loneliness she had carried for so long, she had finally found a place where love and care were abundant, a place where a family could grow in ways she had never thought possible. And so, life on the ranch continued. The summer storms came and went. Challenges arose and were met, and the family faced each obstacle together, learning, laughing, and growing stronger with each passing day. They had discovered that trials, while difficult, could also bring people closer, teaching lessons of courage, resilience, and devotion that no easy days ever could. By the end of the season, the rancher, the Apache woman, and the boy had become more than companions. They had become a true family, bound not by blood, but by love, trust, and the shared experience of overcoming hardship together. They knew that life would continue to test them, but they also knew that together, there was nothing they could not face. Their family had been forged in the fires of challenge, and in that strength, they found hope, joy, and the promise of a future full of possibility. The years passed on the ranch, bringing quiet routines and a steady rhythm of life. The boy, now taller and more confident, moved through the fields with ease, helping with the animals, gathering wood, and tending the small garden with the Apache woman at his side. The rancher watched him from a distance, a quiet pride in his heart. He had watched the boy grow from a frightened, lonely child into a capable, thoughtful young person full of energy and curiosity. In every small accomplishment and every laugh, he saw the beauty of a family built through love and care, not only through blood. The Apache woman had changed as well. Time had softened the quiet sorrow she had carried for so long. Her hands, once marked by survival alone, were now skilled in guiding and teaching, in nurturing and comforting. The boy's laughter had become a part of her daily life, filling the empty spaces she had once thought permanent, and the rancher's presence, steady and kind, gave her a sense of partnership she had not known she could have. Together, they had created something stronger than any she could have imagined: family. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, the rancher and the woman were repairing a section of fence near the pasture. The boy came running, carrying a bundle of wildflowers he had picked from the edges of the fields. "For you," he said, holding them out to her. She smiled, kneeling to take them gently. The simple act felt full of meaning, an expression of love and gratitude that went far beyond words. "You're growing up so fast," the woman said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He laughed and shrugged, as if to say he had no choice but to grow. The rancher joined them, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've made us proud every single day," he said. "You've taught us, too, more than you know." That evening, as the three of them sat outside, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink, The woman spoke quietly, almost to herself. I have lived so long thinking I could never have a family. I thought my life would be only work and survival. But now, I see how wrong I was. Family is not always what we expect. It can be chosen, nurtured, and grown. And I am grateful every day that we found each other. The rancher reached for her hand, holding it firmly but gently. We did find each other, he said. And we built this family together, through every trial, every challenge, and every joy. You are more than I could have hoped for. You are the heart of this family. The boy leaned against them both, feeling the warmth and strength of their words, and the bond that had formed between them. Life on the ranch was not always perfect, but it was rich with meaning. They celebrated each season as it came, from the bright growth of spring to the long heat of summer, the crisp air of autumn, and the quiet stillness of winter. They faced hardships like illness among the animals or the threat of storms, but they did so together, relying on each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. Every challenge reinforced the family they had created and reminded them of the love that had grown quietly and steadily over the years. The Apache woman often found herself reflecting on the boy's growth. She remembered the first time she had met him, the fear in his eyes, the uncertainty and sadness that had weighed on him. She had worried that she could never be a mother, that her inability to have children would leave her incomplete. Yet through caring for him, guiding him, and loving him, she had discovered a depth of fulfillment she had never imagined. Her life was rich with purpose, joy, and the warmth of connection. The rancher, too, found a peace he had not known since the loss of his wife. He had feared that he would live the rest of his life in loneliness, managing the ranch with no one to share his days. But the Apache woman and the boy had changed that entirely. Together, they had built a home full of laughter, learning, and love. He realized that family was not only about what was lost but about what could be found, nurtured, and cherished. One morning, the rancher and the Apache woman were working side by side in the garden when the boy approached, holding a small bundle of letters he had found in an old trunk. The letters were from the rancher's wife, written long before her passing. The boy handed them to the rancher with a shy smile. "She wanted you to be happy," he said softly. The rancher opened the letters carefully, reading her words that spoke of love, hope, and the life they had dreamed together. He felt tears sting his eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude, not sorrow. He had found love and family again in ways his wife could never have predicted. As the years continued, the ranch flourished under their combined care. The animals thrived, the land produced more than it had in years, and the small cabin was always full of warmth and life. Neighbors and travelers often remarked on the harmony of the ranch, amazed at how well the Apache woman and the rancher worked together, and how happy the boy appeared in such a challenging land. Yet for the family, these observations mattered less than the quiet moments they shared. The laughter over a spilled basket of eggs, the warmth of a fire on a cold night, the stories told under the stars. One evening the boy asked a question that had been on his mind for a long time. "Mother," he said, "why did you choose to stay with us? You didn't have to, did you?" She smiled, kneeling to his level. "No, I didn't have to," she admitted. "But I wanted to. I saw that we could be a family, and I wanted to care for you, to love you, and to share my life with your father. Families are not only made of those we are born to, they are made of those we choose to love and care for." The rancher nodded in agreement. "Yes," he said. "And we chose each other every day through everything we faced. That is what makes this family strong and real." The boy hugged them both tightly, understanding the truth in their words. In that embrace, the past sorrows, the hardships, and the fears all melted away, leaving only love, trust, and security. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with brilliant hues of red and gold, the family stood together on the porch of the cabin, gazing at the land that had been both a challenge and a gift. The rancher felt a quiet contentment he had not known in years. He looked at the Apache woman who stood beside him with the boy between them and realized that they had built something enduring. Love, patience, and resilience had created a family that could endure any storm. The Apache woman turned to the rancher, her voice gentle but full of emotion. "You told me once, when I was afraid to speak, that I could not face life alone. But together,